I'm running for the United States Senate in order to use my experience, the relationships which I have over in the Senate, which is now in the majority control of the Democrats and functioning at a much higher level than the House of Representatives has been recently because of the Tea Party Republican control of the agenda, which the House of Representatives has been considering. So I can just
Do you believe that the Tea Party is still a really strong force in the House?
In the House, it's very powerful. It's a real debilitating force in the House. Over in the Senate, we can see on immigration, for example, that members of both parties are working together towards trying to find common ground. I think that's something that makes the Senate more attractive at this time. And so I am running in order to move to an environment where I can, in a bipartisan fashion, work together to put together legislation that would help Massachusetts and the country.
How do you see the difference in roles between being a congressman and being a senator?
Well, obviously, a House member represents in the area of 700,000 people. Massachusetts has 9 congressmen. And a senator represents the entire state. The issues that we work on obviously are identical because each bill has to go through the House and the Senate to become a law. So I have a familiarity with all of the issues, but in the Senate, obviously, at this point in time, as I said before, it's in Democratic control, which I think is good for Massachusetts. It's good for the agenda that helps Massachusetts. And it's something that I think by moving my 36 years of experience over all of my relationships, the dozens of bills which I've passed in a bipartisan fashion with Republicans will help to fashion new legislation for the years ahead that will help our state and our country.
Forgive me, because you are from out of our circulation area. I'm not terribly familiar with your voting record, but I do wonder, from a senatorial point of view, were an issue to come up that the people of the state you gauged were over here on, but you, in looking at it from a national point of view, thought perhaps you should be over here. What do you think your responsibility is? Is it to vote the way you believe your constituents want you to vote, or is it to vote the way you believe is best for the country as the U.S. Senator?
Well, that happens very infrequently. In other words, because I am from Massachusetts, because I grew up here, because I've absorbed who we are, I am representative of what the state wants. So it's not as though I'm representing Kentucky with the values from Massachusetts. I'm representing the state of Massachusetts with values that I was able to have exposed to me at the Immaculate Conception Grammar School, Malden Catholic, Boston College Law School, and all of the other experiences which I've had in life. So for the most part, that just doesn't occur on a frequent basis. Where it would, I would try to balance the present day, for example, polling on issues with where I felt the issue had to go. So for example, in 1996, we had a vote on the Defense of Marriage Act. I voted no on the Defense of Marriage Act. There were only 67 out of 435. The polling on that, even in Massachusetts in 1996, was supportive of the Defense of Marriage Act. I felt that was the right position, though. And I think time has borne out the correctness of my vote. Public opinion has shifted on it. I helped to lead the shift on it. And now we look at that vote in 1996 as almost political prehistoric times. If anyone could support, that kind of legislation. So there are issues like that where sometimes you just have to vote for what you think is best and give the leadership to move public opinion.
You mentioned that one of the committees you had served on was telecommunications. And we spoke briefly earlier about the prison program and the current conversation, public conversation about government access to private data. How do you feel about all of that?
Well, there is a Dickensian quality to these technologies. They are the best of technologies and the worst of technologies simultaneously. They can enable, they can ennoble, they can degrade, they can debase. It all depends upon what the values are that we instill in the technologies. So here, there is a clear tension that exists between privacy and security. The irony, of course, is that we were attacked on Patriots Day in April. And of course, we celebrate Patriots Day because we celebrate freedom. We celebrate our throwing off of the yoke of government oppressing us. And yet that was the statement that these terrorists wanted to make against our country. So it's important for us to ensure that all of the necessary tools are in the hands of law enforcement in order to detect and apprehend any who would pose threats to our country. But at the same time, we have to ensure that the privacy of innocent Americans is not compromised, and that there are real protections in place to ensure that that is the case. So in order to find the guilty needle, an innocent haystack has to be collected. We have to make sure the standards for that innocent haystack are very strong, so that as they search for that one piece of telecommunications information, that it doesn't also simultaneously lead unnecessarily to the compromise of the privacy of tens of millions of Americans.
And do you think that's happened?
I think that's what Congress has to try to determine now. Has that happened? And I've been concerned about whether there are strong enough standards that are applied when warrants are issued for the collection of this data. Last year, I requested from the 9 largest wireless companies in the United States information with regard to how often they had been requested in 2011 to provide to law enforcement information about wireless users. The answer was 1.3 million times in 2011, law
That's
enforcement.
all law enforcement.
All law
Requested by
enforcement.
whom? So-
As requested by law
That-
enforcement
that's
at all levels. And again, that raises questions, so when, for example, some criminal escaping from a crime might go down the Southeast Expressway, when the police are looking for information, they can go to every single cell tower all the way down the Southeast Expressway. But as they try to get information on that criminal, they're also downloading every bit of information on every cell tower all the way down the Southeast Expressway. So it raises questions as to what is the protection then for the information about every other person who was on the Southeast Expressway that night in terms of their location,
So that information is collected and then stored, correct?
That's correct. So the question is, what are the safeguards that are placed around that information? Who has access to it? And so for the country now, we have to have this very large conversation. I am the founder of the Privacy Caucus in Congress. So I established that caucus back in 1999, to make sure that there would be a counterbalance to corporate and governmental capacity to be able to collect information about Americans. So this device is a tracking device as well. Telephone company knows where each one of us is right now. If we have a device in our pocket, they know which floor we're on in this building. Okay. So that's a lot of information. In 1999, I was successful in passing legislation that said that none of this information could ever be sold, for example, by the telephone company as a product. That people could just pay the phone company to say, where is, Joe Dokes this afternoon, and make it a product. So my legislation made that illegal. My legislation, my law makes it illegal, for example, for the satellite industry to tell anyone what programs that people are watching. My legislation in 1999, as part of the financial overhaul legislation, protects against the compromise of the health and financial information of people as these huge banks started consolidating. And there would actually be healthcare records in there as well, because insurance companies require healthcare exams as a condition of getting insurance policies. So over the years, I have passed many pieces of legislation in the privacy area. We have to make sure that as the technologies evolve and become more sophisticated, that we attach our values to them, even as we give to the police, we give to law enforcement the capacity which they need in order to prevent crimes or terrorist acts from occurring in the first place.
So you talked about corporations, but it's of more concern, I think, when the government is collecting as much information as it reportedly has been. And you said that Congress will need to determine if it's of concern, but the public also needs to determine that. But where do you stand on it? I imagine some of this is new to you and some of this you've known quite some time.
Well, we have to make sure that big data doesn't turn into Big Brother. We have to fully understand what is going on and make sure that we put safeguards in place. So the revelation that there is now there's a huge facility out in Utah,
And another one being built in Maryland.
which is being used to collect all of this data, is eye-opening. I did not know that. I think that it's important for us to understand what are the standards that are used. Can any of that information be compromised in the absence of a legally obtained warrant that is specifically targeting particular information that could be relevant to a crime or to prevention of a crime? We have to know this as we move forward.
Do you believe, Congressman, that and I'm not aware of it, the enabling legislation that set up this special court to which the government is supposed to appeal in these matters, is adequate to the task? I believe it was part of the Patriot Act and then updated as part of the Patriot Act.
We need to, I think, pay much closer attention to what the standards are that the FISA court applies. We have to make sure that there aren't authorities which are granted, which are open-ended and not time-limited in any manner, shape, or form. We have to make sure that there is some specificity that attaches to what it is that law enforcement officials are looking for, and that the court is not allowing for a digital dragnet to be created that hasn't been limited to what the specific threat is that a law enforcement agency believes could be posed as a threat to our country.
Do you agree with the President's characterization that this is unnecessary, limited encroachment on privacy, or do you are you still sort of saying, I need to find out more?
I need to find out more. I think that there are many questions that have to be asked. We have to fully understand what is going on inside of the NSA, inside of the FBI, inside of the CIA. We have to understand that more fully. And I think we're at the beginning of this exploration. Back in 2005, in the beginning of 2006, it was revealed that President Bush had authorized a warrantless wiretap program. So within 2 weeks, I actually held an emergency meeting in Faneuil Hall. 600 people came to just talk about that warrantless wiretap program. Actually, Bill Delahunt came to that meeting back in 2006. So I have grave concerns. You know, the job of Congress is to oversee the executive branch. The job of Congress is to make sure that the laws are being executed in a way that is consistent with what the legislation authorized the executive branch to do.
Last question, and then
Okay, sure.
we'll go broader. Do you believe that the young man who's identified himself as the source of this information should be prosecuted?
I think he should. You know, he, in my opinion, has now allegedly broken the law. So I think that there should be a prosecution, yes.
Should we have other questions?
Okay, sequestration.
Look, may I say though, but I would say at the same time, I think the conversation that is now taking place across America is also very needed. So I would like to divide that question, just so it's clear that that's an important.
We may see his face on a coin soon, who knows?
You know?
Anything's possible.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah. Okay,
Sorry.
Amy, sequestration.
Sequestration.
Yeah.
The public is, maybe not now, but starting to become a little bit aware of the effects of it. If you move into the Senate, what plans do you have for addressing it, if any?
Well, sequestration is bad for Massachusetts. I voted no on sequestration back in 2011. It's going to lead to a loss of 60,000 jobs in Massachusetts just in the first year.
Right.
It cuts into NIH funding, it cuts into educational funding,
Exactly.
healthcare funding, defense funding, programs which are central to the well-being of the Massachusetts economy. Sequestration is just a fancy word for cuts, mindless
Across the board,
cuts.
mindless cuts.
Mindless cuts.
So
That-
how to address it?
We need to substitute something that is much more targeted, that doesn't cut NIH funding at the same level that is cutting another program that deserves to be cut. The NIH budget is a perfect example. We are the second largest recipient of NIH grants in the country after California. So cuts in the NIH funding really go right at the heart of the business plan which we have for the state. And there are biotech companies in Kendall Square, but they're in Quincy as well.
Mhm.
They're everywhere. And so we have to make sure that we send someone to Washington who's going to fight for reopening of sequestration. So we can actually discuss the cuts, but on a program-by-program basis.
And do you think that's possible with the divisiveness in Congress, especially in the House?
I believe that the Tea Party Republicans are obdurately opposed to reopening sequestration. And that makes it difficult because any change would have to go through both the House and the
Right.
Senate.
So, the Gang of Eight with the sequestration, they tried to tackle it a couple of times.
Mhm.
Is that a group that you are interested in joining, being a part of, moving legislation forward?
I support what they're doing. I support the concept of bipartisanship. I think the issue has to be dealt with. It's been too long waiting
Mhm.
to be tended to. The 11 million people are not going back to the countries that they came from. They're already entwined in our economy. We should find the way to do so. We should do it on a bipartisan basis. I think the only solution can come from the Senate initially. If we pass something out of the Senate, then I think that will actually serve as the model that will paradox the House and the Tea Party Republicans, and I think then all of the pressure will go to them in order to find some constructive way to pass counterpart legislation. But unless the Senate does it, I don't think the House is intending, the House Republican leadership is not intending on passing anything that is truly bipartisan.
I'm wondering, when you talked a lot about the Tea Party, and I'm wondering if you feel like yourself or your party is in any way complicit in some of the lack of movement that's going on in Washington.
Well, you know, the Tea Party is really the pluperfect form of a particular brand of elected official. There's an inherent paradox in their philosophy. They don't believe in government, but they have to run for office to win in order to make sure that the government doesn't work. So now that they have all these elected positions, you know, they pretty much are shutting down the capacity for the House of Representatives to work, to be effective. And so, in truth, the Senate is a perfect example. There are Democrats, there are Republicans, but they're working together. And since the Democrats control the Senate, we obviously are saying over in the Senate that we want to work with Republicans who want to be constructive. In the House, right now, that's not the case. The hand is not being extended to Democrats to work in a bipartisan fashion on these big issues.
So is that a no then?
There is no equivalency whatsoever in terms of the contribution which is made to the gridlock. The Tea Party Republicans have arrived as a brand new force in American political history, and it's unprecedented in their level of opposition to true bipartisan cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, I think just, obviously it's a very condensed campaign here, and we haven't really seen much of you on the South Shore. I think last week was Quincy and Hull. I'm just curious what your sense of issues that matter to South Shore or voters south of Boston are. I mean, you know, Pilgrim comes to mind, and they've been outspoken on that, so maybe some issues around that, or other issues that come to mind for this region.
Yeah, the nature of the election is quite unique. A 90-day primary total, and then 56 days for the general election. So the entire primary was only 90 days long. And that just creates a logistical time energy